And we're live. Welcome, everyone, to episode 8 of In the Hot Seat. If you were online, we had a couple of minutes worth of technical difficulty there, but I think we're all worked out and ready to go. For our repeat viewers, thanks for joining us again. These new to the show, it's a bi-weekly show. Every 2 weeks, we bring somebody in, industry experts, customers, and put them in the hot seat for a lively discussion, some debate, even some discourse as we try to humanize the digital experience. And we really look across the whole customer lifecycle in our discussions, technology and culture as well. And if you're on LinkedIn, I think there's a couple of things I should say. First of all, if you're on the original LinkedIn leak that went out, that one's not working. So I guess you don't know. If you're on Brent's LinkedIn Live, then you're good. And if you have problems on LinkedIn, you might want to switch to YouTube or Facebook. We have seen a bug that pops up once in a while that makes the show cycle. It can be kind of annoying. So, I mean, unless you just want to hear us in a loop, which I suppose would work. But so today's show's a little bit different than our normal format, though. And this partially because this is sort of a transition show to a new series that we'll talk about later on this show and set up a little bit. Tease a little bit maybe. But today, the four of us, you see here, Pete, Thomas, Jody, and I are going to take a shot at trying to look at CX and CRM into 2023 and beyond. And, you know, as an analyst, that's like my favorite December, January activity is to try to think about what might happen there. So we're going to talk about that and just try to go through a few of the trends that we've seen and things that we think are happening. I know there are a couple of things that I'll do to set this up, and then we can jump into a bit of discussion. But one of the things that obviously has been a big buzz for the last, few years, but particularly over the last 6 months is really AI and how we're starting to see artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning in different parts of the customer life cycle and trying to help out in different areas, whether it's make the agents better in support, or whether it's provide better predictive information to sales reps. I mean, it's across the whole thing, and particularly Chat GPT, the GPT-3 engine. We've heard a lot of that over the last few weeks, and then the one that I think is a base for some of the discussion today, and that's this concept that I've looked at for years. And Pete, you'll appreciate this one. The gap between the buyer and the seller, and it just continues to get bigger because I think all the technologies have had a big impact on how buyers look for information, what they trust, what they do. And unfortunately, the sellers and the sales tools have kind of stayed in the same base process. So now finally, we're starting to see that fray a bit and new technologies come out that can really help us address that. And that actually goes all the way down into marketing, into customer service as well, because certainly there are other pieces of this that have started to fray, particularly around personalization. And I'll hit on that one a little bit more later. But I think we need to rethink the way we look at that and journeys and that sort of thing. So that's sort of a base of some of the things that we're going to talk about. But why don't we do a quick round of here's who we are. And you can start to set out some of the topics that you want to go with. Jody, why don't you start?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jody Spencer, and I focus on marketing in talking about partner ecosystems in the technology space. And one of the areas that I think is really going to be a focus for a lot of organizations, and we'll talk about, is the partner ecosystem. I think that is going to have impact not only how we look at that from a sales perspective and a sales channel, but it has implications into that customer journey with the onboarding and the enablement, because now the focus has spread and people are finding tools and solutions through a much wider network. And it's really, I think, going to drive how organizations think about that user experience, expanding into the partner ecosphere. So I'm excited to get into that.
Awesome.
Thomas.
Thanks, Jody. Thomas, how about you?
Yeah, hi, Thomas. being an analyst as well, so I will want to look into kind of macro trends that we see right now, basically in the area of CRM/CX. What moves us, especially when we are looking also at the economic situation right now. There's a bit of uncertainty. How do themes like automation, how do themes like trust go on, and what's in general going on with CX? That's what I'd like to discuss.
Great. Thanks, Thomas. And Pete.
And you're Pete is on mute.
Pete, I don't think we can hear you.
Wrong microphone, even worse.
Well, so maybe we'll come back to Pete in just a minute. Well, so I know the topic he wants to bring up, and that's related to my comment around sales as well. So Pete, it looks like you might be off mute now. Pete, you want to try? No, still lips moving, no sound. So
there we go. I'm sorry.
There you go.
So sorry.
There you go. No worries.
Yeah. So anyway, so I'm really focused on this idea of, buyers buy digitally and sellers still sell sort of in an analog way. So there's been this growing gap for the last 15 or 20 years, just, inch by inch. And this gap now is so large that there's a complete disconnect, I think, in terms of how the buyer starts their journey in terms of acquiring something. And, oftentimes the salesperson is coming in very late into that process. And to me, that's a very huge problem for salespeople. And later I'll talk about the Mark Benioff Slack message he sent to his entire employees about, how do we improve sales productivity or productivity in general inside of Salesforce. And if the CRM company has a problem with sales productivity, then, what does that mean for all the rest of us? So that's kind of my area of interest.
Cool. Thanks. Well, so I'm going to start in marketing and move up to sales in a second. But this is something that's related to what I sort of teased at the beginning, and that's this idea that two concepts that I think are really being challenged this year. The first one is all around the idea of customer journey and journey mapping, and I this has been a soapbox item for me for quite a while, so I won't go too deep into this, but the problem, I think, and this is something that I think you're going to see a lot of change around automation and AI in CRM, and a lot around CDP and data as well, is that when we think of personalization, it's almost gotten to the point now where we're really starting to see this come apart. It's almost like we have this contextually irrelevant personalization, and I'm sure some of you have already experienced that. Personalization based on segmentation a lot of times can feel not as individualized as you think. So I would posit that we really start to think about this as an individualization concept rather than personalization. How do I learn enough about your behavior to individualize the interactions with you? And that ties right into this idea around journey maps. And I think, and we may go into this a little bit more later, but I think the biggest thing here is how do we turn a static map into an interactive model? How can we take real-time data and take technologies like AI and like digital twinning and use that to set up a model that drives our interaction with the customer in a very positive way, in an individualized way, and a much more effective way. So I'll let you guys react to that, but that's kind of where my head is for this year. I think those are two of the biggest things that we're going to see companies start to deal with and overcome.
Michael, I'm going to get up there on the soapbox with you because I love customer journey mapping, and I agree with you, right? We've moved from this concept of a start to an end point, and there are detours and return trips, and there's a lot of dynamic movement going on. I think we're starting to make some strides in bringing technology solutions to help glean that information. One of the things that I think will be imperative in that journey is not only building that model for automation and for that individualized content, but it's also going to force organizations to think about how they retrain departments, because now it's no longer just sales and marketing up front that's involved in that journey.
Yep.
There are departments from legal and finance and accounting and support. I mean, it's vast in terms of who is interacting with the customer during that journey. So I think it's really going to push the boundaries of how we get everyone involved and educate and get everyone on the same page.
Yeah, I think that's those are great points, Jody. And I think that underneath that, this concept of real time is going to play a big part of that too, right? Can we get real time data, stream data that we can take action on and do it in a way inside the system that lets us do, in the moment kind of individualization. Thomas, you wanted to jump in there?
Yeah, that gets compounded by two things actually. One is that the customers, a person's behavior needs to be modeled in time. So there's no need for having a big as data warehouse on Thomas or on Michael or on Jody, because this very likely doesn't predict my current intent. Yeah. And second, I just say companies still get it totally wrong. The customer journey is the customer's journey. Right now, what happens is it's getting served to the customer regardless of where, how, and why he or she wants to go that way. So I'd advocate for an understanding that says, well, we are building the map, but it's a map of interaction points, like a Google map, basically. And the current understanding is more like, well, it's the route planning. And the route planning is done by the customer. Yeah. Simple as.
Well, and
so
I'm sorry. One thing I wanted to add that sort of ties you and Jody together is that she talked about how it's sort of recursive, and I think part of the problem is that as soon as you add another type of buyer persona and another one, now it's whatever that complexity was times however many people are now taking their own journeys, and then we talk about the customer and there's buyers, and how do you reconcile that?
Yep. Yeah.
Well,
sometimes
and then
Jody and I agree.
I know it's a miracle, but adding a level of interesting complexity to that too through the journey is kind of what we talked about a couple episodes back, right? This blurring of the lines of B2C and B2B expectations. Bring that into the customer journey, and now you're really reworking how we think about serving up in those interaction points, Thomas, through their journey and expectations.
I mean, it's essentially people to people, no matter what, B2B or B2C. You're still selling to individuals, and you still need to understand individuals. The decision process is different, and that part certainly you need to understand and take into account. But I think just from a how do you design this? I mean, I think we all want contextually relevant, individualized interactions. And some things are transactions, some are commodities, but when it's something that's high value to me, then that's what I look for. And I think that's and it's this idea of an interactive map. And even some of the product analytics companies over the last couple of years have started to build out behavioral tools to analyze behavior and provide real-time feedback. So I think that's just needs to expand across a much broader set of functions.
Well,
the one thing that ties into the chat GDP that you said before that ties in with, you just said, people are interacting with people. Well, what happens when that person isn't a person, right? We're going to have more of these bots out there doing some of these interactions, and that's part of this whole ecosystem of the customer experience. And that's,
Well, and
Well,
it depends too,
cost
right?
of your
Depends
bot.
on what I'm doing. Because if I'm just looking for a quick answer, a bot's probably fine.
Right.
But if I want an actual interaction, I need a smart bot that can take me into a person and do that fairly quickly. So I think that's another shift that you'll see in the technology is there's a place for both, but are they in the right place in your process?
Well, and I think the timelines have escalated, right? We think about this concept of waiting is no longer even acceptable, right? We as consumers are trained to think about immediacy, right? If I see a product and I want to get my hands on it, I just jump on Amazon, I prime it, and the next day I have it at my door, or even the same day. Well, that level of immediacy has completely eliminated patience, I think, with people. So, that's I think where bots and intelligent bots are going to become even more important.
Yeah, I think there's definitely places that plays out heavily, and like I said, there are certain places you can deflect or you can use it as informational. That's fine, but when it comes to personalized or individualized, it's a different interaction. Yeah. Thomas, I know you wanted to say something. I can see you.
It's a little back to the B2B, B2C thing. I increasingly believe that a distinction between B2C and B2B is no more the real distinction, but we are actually talking process complexity. I mean, look at our purchase decisions when I want to, as individuals. When I buy a pair of shoes, that's quite simple actually. I just go there, look at it, like it, buy it. Simple as. If I want to buy my next house, or in my case, my next catamaran, we are talking 6 to 7 digits. Then the process is probably not going without my wife. Means we have a buying center there already. It starts with the car, so you don't just do that. There's a process behind it as well. So we are probably better off just talking process complexity instead of distinguishing between arbitrary lines of business.
I mean, I think that's accurate, and I would add to that what I said before a bit about decision process, right? That's where the complexity a lot of times comes out, is in that process of committee versus individual versus owner, that sort of thing. But I think you're right. I think it's entirely complexity based, and our systems aren't really designed in that direction right now. So we really have to rethink some of that.
Cars, I right now need to talk to my daughters.
Right. Well, and when we think about the stakeholders or decision makers in the process, if we're good with this topic, I think this ties in nicely to the other trend that I'd love to talk about, which is the partner ecosystem, right? Because I believe they're a key participant now in some of those discussions, and the way in which we look at ecosystems and think about their importance in the process, I think is definitely going to change in 2023. It's no longer just from the sales cycle and from the brand awareness, right? We know that organizations are putting a lot of money into building out ecosystems, and partners are becoming a much more critical piece of that conversation. Now, what does this do, I think, to the offering, the process, how customers are engaging with you? It's going to, I think, impact how organizations build their product, how they think about that self-service model initially up front, the customer engagement and interaction with the product, because I don't have control. If my product is out on a partner marketplace, if my partners are out there representing that product and gain interest, the customers going and interacting with that product or that solution, and they're forming an opinion. At this point, I, as the solution provider, have no idea what they're doing with the product. So I think it's really going to drive how we think about the APIs for our technology and more open and what can be done with our partner networks. I think it is going to really put some pressure on user experience and interface. And that ability for users to get that aha moment on their own without having that sales or partner interaction to move it forward in the next conversation.
Well, it also sort of changes the way you set your own brand narrative, right? You lose control, or maybe that's not the right word. You delegate control of that narrative into your ecosystem because they're your representative in that conversation too.
Absolutely. You now
Then
have
that's-
external education, right? For partners and customers.
And it's not only a technology problems or challenge, not to say problem, but the recently had two interesting situations doing a software selection. One of the vendors that I approached just didn't reply. They didn't even bother. Well, they are doing indirect only, but they didn't even respond in recommending a fitting partner. Nothing, not at all. And the other one, for a mid-sized business, applied more an SMB, so with a capital S and then an MB process model, which basically says, oh, well, I'll deliver you the software. I can tell you a lot of it, where it fits and what doesn't. And partner, well, do it yourself. Yeah. So this is also a lot of an education thing and a cooperation thing between the hub of the ecosystem, and there in foreseeable future will always be a hub, and whoever is a spoke participant. So there are, I think vendors are in charge of enabling them more and providing more.
You're starting to see, from a system perspective, you're starting to see some systems that could facilitate that sort of extension, right? I mean, even like Slack, for example, lets you build almost like an ecosystem channel ability to talk, interact, or in the systems themselves. Can you share leads? Can you share data? Can you work together on an opportunity or whatever? And that's definitely a challenge for the systems that are in play today.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Which
Well,
could
you're
neatly
seeing
bring us
more-
to bots, but
You're seeing solutions crop up too, just thinking about that marketplace, partner marketplace, right? Back in the day, building on a marketplace was a huge undertaking, and it still is.
it still is.
But for organizations that perhaps are in the SMB space, and before it was just too high of a cost in order to reap the benefit of that initially, we're now seeing players come into this space that offer a solution to get up and running pretty quickly and allow SMBs to have their own marketplace. So I think the dynamic is going to get very interesting this year.
Well, I'd spent time at G2 for several years building out that marketplace, and one of the things that we did that I always thought was an interesting twist or shift is providing the capability in a hub and spoke way, again, for you to take what a G2 marketplace, a review marketplace does, and extend those out into vendor marketplaces. So rather than you having your own feedback mechanism built into your marketplace, you just use the G2 marketplace feedback, and it ends up being an extension of their site. So that's, in another way, you're using the ecosystem in a completely different way to underpin the marketplace, Thomas, as you brought.
From a vendor perspective, I think most marketplaces are vendor centric. So whereas they should become network centric.
Yeah.
So that way all involved parties have maximized value, not at the least the customer. So right now the marketplaces are often organized around maximizing value for vendor by using the other parties. So
that goes back to our sales discussion too, right? I mean, this is the same thing. If it's not meeting the expectations of the buyer, you're simply trying to dictate how they perform their journey based on what you want them to do, not what they want to do.
Which comes down to adding value, and to add value, you have to understand that customer, and that's really the challenge for so many people. And the thing I wanted to sort of weave into this is that not only is like Xerox did a study about itself years ago, and found that 87% of what they taught in sales training was forgotten by week 12. 87%, right? So right there, you're kind of set up to fail if you're a salesperson going into a complex environment when you're relying only on your human memory. And I don't know how many products Xerox has, but Dell has about 125. And so the way that we've done this over time is say, okay, Pete, you sell these 4, and Jody, you sell these 3, and we just sort of chopped it up like that. And to me, like the I think of that as sort of the Rand McNally level of technology, but buyers are this sort of GPS nav app on your phone level, and sort of that's the difference. And the thing that makes that whole divide even worse is turnover. So in 2001, Forbes posted an article that said 51% of millennials planned on changing jobs in 2022. And I just saw this thing come across my newswire yesterday that CNBC reported that Monster took a survey and said 96% of people that they surveyed were looking to change jobs in 2023. So this is just sort of like this. How could you possibly, from just a business model standpoint, catch up to the fact that these people need to be productive, and then you marry that with the company after company laying off 10% of its workforce and so on. That to me, that's why I was really focused on solving this productivity issue. In this
Out of curiosity, has there been the loop back? How many did change in 22?
I haven't seen any.
No, I haven't seen it either, but that's interesting. And I mean, obviously, some of those were involuntary also, because it certainly got kind of crazy near the end of the year. And that actually dovetails back into the talent shortage idea, too, that we talked about a lot in our industry and across the board, that there's a talent shortage. And particularly if sales is a friction point, it's very difficult. And I've seen studies that have come out over the last few years that talk about how most sales managers, most salespeople will tell you that they believe sales is hard or very hard in comparison to the year before or the 2 years before, that sort of thing. So in other words, it's just getting harder. And I wonder in that context, then how do we build tools that enable versus build tools that perpetuate a current process, which I think may be part of the problem, actually.
Yeah, so I wrote down the word control earlier when somebody mentioned it, and how that's just sort of an illusion, and maybe always has been to some degree. But when you go into Jody's idea of your channel relationships, your partners, they don't work for you, and they probably sell your competitors' technology. So you have to influence them by adding value, making their job as easy as possible, which means simplicity. How simple can I make this thing I'm asking you to do? In my experience, at least with sort of partner channels, is they're going to gravitate toward whatever is simpler to do. Right? They've got, if you think you've got a lot of products at Dell, try being a reseller of Dell and HP and Lenovo, and there's just the complexity is mind-boggling. So simple is kind of table stakes at this point, I think.
Well, I'm going to expand upon the idea of simplicity, but also responsiveness, right? Because partners are going to, yes, agreed, gravitate to what is easier and quicker for them to be able to sell. But also when they have an issue, when they have a question, when they need something and they interact with your organization, making that simple for the partner to get the information they need and talk with somebody internally. So simplicity, I think, is going to drive a couple different ways and be more important.
One thing missing, one real thing missing. So it's not only simple for the vendor and partner, but it must be the right thing for the customer. Looking at Pete's example here, having Lenovo, Dell, and whatnot as vendors, what is the right set of solutions for this customer? Within the limits of me wanting to be profitable, of course. But this is we need to get into a thinking that my success is defined by the customer being successful.
Yeah. Well, that changes the value of a couple of things in that conversation then, because what you just said is based on gaining more understanding of the buyer and what the buyer's doing, their behavior, and also understanding how to respond to that, which sort of takes me back to something that I also think is a big trend for this year, and that is the evolution of what we've been calling CDP, customer data platforms, but they've really only been marketing data platforms. We should have probably called them MDPs. And all of a sudden, we're starting to see this data explode, and the need is across all of those, consistently all the functions in the business, and not just the things we think of traditionally, like sales and marketing and customer service, but I mean, Jody, you mentioned this, like logistics or finance, or all those things are tied together with the customer. And in the case of the ecosystem, the partner, how do we bring them into the same issue with the data, underlying data? How do we make that consistent and accurate across all of those functions and silos?
The one thing I'll challenge you on, I'm totally fine leaving it as CDP, because when we bring up the term marketing, I still think there is such a gut negative reaction sometimes internally to organizations thinking that's just marketing data, right? So customer data, I think you get more buy-in.
No, I mean, I don't disagree with you. I think that's absolutely right. I just think it's interesting that we've had this thing CDP for a few years, but where's it really been focused? And now all of a sudden we start to see, look, if we're talking real-time data across all these different functions and being able to share, that's a completely different focus on a CDP than being able to segment in marketing, effectively.
Which is one of the reasons I think we're starting to see more marketing individuals at the table for some of those deeper discussions, right? Because the information that marketers can glean and have access to has more value than how do I tailor a PPC ad? What email nurture campaign do I run out? Now it's a realization of how valuable that is throughout the entire life cycle. So, marketing is coming into more high level executive discussions. And I think that's a great trend that will continue.
Well, and I think sales and marketing are sort of blending more and more and more together, right? Because it's very hard to separate those functions. And the more you rely on the data and the more you focus on the behavior of the prospect or customer, the more that has to go together, right? You can't do the handoffs the way we used to because it's just not effective.
Michael, have you given any thought, or any of you guys given any thought to the sort of the growth of CDP in its newest incarnation versus a downturning economy and sort of the constraints are going to come with that? Is that the time? Like, is CDP, the next generation, a big IT project, or is it something that could be done, in a shorter term with handful of resources?
Yeah, I mean, and you guys chime in. I know, Thomas, particularly you and I have talked about CDP a little bit in the past. So, but I mean, I think the problem is in a downturn economy, you need to be more efficient and more effective, right? You have to be more productive. You have to do more with less. And if you go back to the idea that you need this data to actually to be able to sell more effectively, then I'd say that, if I was giving you advice, I'd say that's generally the first place to look when you start to think about customer experiences. Look at your data picture first, because everything else is built on that foundation.
Yes, I'd agree to that. However, setting up a CDP globally or in a bigger scale is nothing that you do with pocket money. Or with the spare change that you have in your wallet. So it's quite a project, and the challenge is doing the right thing versus investing smartly and getting fast returns. That's why I do think the ones who did implement a CDP last year will see quite some gains. Mm-hmm. The other ones will be unhappy that they didn't, and probably concentrate on short-term gains, smaller gains even, in order to show profit, increase their profitability or reduce their cost. So this also has to do with the thing that defining the monetary return of a CDP is hard. This is really hard. It's even harder than defining the return of a CX project. So that's why they probably will turn down the scales and maybe do smaller scales implementations first, which would be a good thing to start off with.
No, I mean, I don't disagree with you there. I think you have to approach this in an incremental value way, right? Where do I get the most value the fastest? And then, particularly in a downturn. And I mean, Pete, something you said earlier too ties into this idea of how can I give salespeople the tools that help them quickly get up to speed and function more effectively in an environment where they don't retain this training very well. The data is fragmented. I mean, there are a lot of challenges there, right? Yeah. So I think that's probably another big trend for this year then is how can you what tools can you use with the sales force to help them versus the old tools that don't help a sales force. They actually put overhead onto the salesperson. So
I'd like to just add one more expansion to when you're implementing CDP, agreed, right? More efficiency, you're doing more with less, you're being more productive, but there also needs to be more relevancy, right? Like we talked about in the very beginning. And I think to achieve that, it's the combination of the CDP applications and solutions and ABM. Those go hand in hand because of that intent data and understanding what's going on outside of what you have, the information you're privy to, right, on your website or your interactions with your customers. There's a lot going on beyond your domain. Yeah. And I think those type of solutions combined could be very powerful. But to your point, Thomas, at a global level, it's an undertaking at both expense and time. So rolling it out in a POC manner is I think what we're going to see more and more of. And vendors need to take that into consideration.
Yeah. And talking to Pete's point, so what does help? Automation. That's the other trend that I do see. Yeah. So you can help. That's where low code or no code come into play, as opposed to remote is good, RPA. So this process automation band-aid thingy that just automates the UI. So what we are looking at is having tools that are easily adaptable to changing processes. And
in fact, it facilitate that, right? Because that's
and that across systems, by the way, ideally. And this will help, regardless of department, actually.
Yeah, no, agreed.
And it's going to change the way we develop personas.
Yeah.
Right, both from a customer perspective and even internal, right? Because you have internal personas that you need to think about as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. All right, so we're getting nearer the end of our time, and I know we wanted to save a little bit of time to talk about what's coming this year from in the hot seat perspective. So, I think let's maybe take a little twist there and spend just a couple minutes talking about what's coming soon. And Pete, I know you and I worked a little bit on this next series, so you can talk about the sales series that's coming. It's a 5-episode series that is going to start in 2 weeks, and then I know we have a couple of others that are on tap as well. So maybe Jody, Thomas, you guys can chime in on that too. But Pete, tell them a little bit about the sales series first.
Okay. So our first conversation is going to be about understanding the data quality challenges in CRM. So, why are the reasons that the data in CRM might not be accurate or sparse or whatever, and what can we do about that? So that's our first episode. The second one is about what we were talking about earlier in terms of this widening gaps between digital buyers and analog sellers, and we're going to really explore that in a lot more depth. Third one we're going to do is about discovery itself, and is discovery sort of a stage in a process, or is it a stage in every stage, or an aspect of every stage in a process? And we're going to be joined by the author of a book called Doing Discovery, Peter Cohen, who's a really interesting person to talk to on that on that front. The next one is, what does customer engagement mean in the context of enterprise sales? So, one of the trends I've seen is that while we are trying to engage the customer in the marketing world, what does that mean to an enterprise salesperson? And how much overlap is there, and how can they work together? And then the last one is titled "Technology is the Tail Wagging the Dog," and we're going to have the former CTO of Goldman Sachs as a guest for that particular show. And it's really easy, I think, in the market to have this sort of shiny object kind of experience where you see something that looks really cool, and maybe we should adopt that without understanding the root cause of whatever it is you're trying to solve. And to me, that's something, if you're going to make good purchases in 2023, you can't be a shiny object kind of a play. It has to be, what is our problem, and what are all the implications of that, and then what would solve that problem.
Well, I'm excited.
You all have quite the series coming up. I mean, that's going to take us right into Q3 almost.
Yeah, no, that's nice. So I know we've had a couple of other discussions around series. What's coming next after that?
Well, we got 2 more series lined up that we are currently planning. So one is more about organizational culture and CX, with looking like how does mergers and acquisitions fit into the experience? How does a theme like the quiet quitting or quiet hiring, as we have right now as well, fit into creating and adopting good CX? So this is a bit more in the flow. So there we have a 4 or 5 piece series that is already being planned. And the second thing that is on the roadmap is more about an industry orientation within CX, with a particular interest on the healthcare industry, because this is quite a biggie. Healthcare, I mean, it's 2-3 trillion just in the US. And, well, the experience sucks, right? So
Yes.
how can we get better there? Yeah. And lastly, well, there are always a couple of technologies that one can and will look into. So there was Metaverse, there's Web3. Right now we have ChatGPT that is beyond fever pitch right now. So there might be some individual discussions just thrown in between.
I think we're going to circle back and talk more about the subscription management concept. We had a great discussion last year that started that. I think there's more to come out of that. We also had talked about the differences with breaking down the silos and getting everybody on board, not the differences, but breaking down the silos and getting everyone on board within an organization. So we have a lot of one-off episodes coming up as well, and it's going to be a really great year. I'm excited.
No, I'm excited too. So I think that's about all the time we have today. So first, thank you all for joining us as we put ourselves in the hot seat for a change, which is fun. And I think we all survived, so that's good, right? And a reminder that in 2 weeks, the sales series kicks off that Pete just described. So I'm Michael Fauscette. I'm here with Jody Spencer, Pete Smith, and Thomas Wieberneit. And we want to thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.
Bye, everyone.